Welcome back. Earlier last week, the National Assembly set aside time to pay tribute to former President Nelson Mandela. The debate follows last month's 67 minutes set aside by South Africans to honor Mr. Mandela's example of public service. The debate under the theme, Take Action and Make Every Day a Mandela Day, was led by the Chief Whip of the majority party, Dr. Mathole Motshekga. Let's take a look.
In his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, he states that he never much cared for personal prizes. He said, I quote, "A man does not become a freedom fighter in the hope of winning awards, but when I was notified that I had won the 1993 Nobel Peace Prize, I was deeply moved. The award was a tribute to all South Africans and especially those who had fought in the struggle. I would accept it on their behalf." I close the quote. He was amazingly practical and forthright. Upon criticisms of his acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize together with apartheid last President F.W. de Klerk, he countered the accusation by simply stating that, I quote, I never sought to undermine Mr. de Klerk for the practical reason that the weaker he was, the weaker the negotiations process, I close the quote. He further added that, I quote, to make peace with an enemy, one must work with that enemy, and that enemy becomes your partner, I close the quote. On the election campaign trail in 1994, he believed it important to ensure that people understood the realities of what it would take to transform and develop the country and that it could not be done overnight. He challenged blacks to understand and have patience and was clear that he would not patronize them. He was adamant that government could not do all for the people, but that they would also have to join hands in their own development. He also reassured whites that they were South Africans too and that this was their land as well, although sometimes they don't listen.
In order to protect and promote Mr. Mandela's vision, Parliament must play a bigger role and work to a much higher standard. His legacy is greater and more profound than the political contestation between the parties represented here. Despite our partisan differences, we have an obligation to work towards common objectives. It is easy for us to stand here and deliver honeyed words, yet sincerity is subject to proof. Why should we hold this debate here today if we don't heed President Mandela's injunction and his call to service? There can be no better tribute to him than if we take our task of representation and public service seriously. President Mandela elegantly said of the work of this Parliament, and I quote, "Yours is the almost sacred duty to ensure government by the people under the Constitution." Perhaps this is the time for each one of us to ask if we need to reacquaint ourselves with Mr. Mandela's vision. When we weigh the gravity of each sentence of his speech, it is not hard to conclude that we, in many respects, have regressed. The theme of constitutional democracy was woven into every line of Mr. Mandela's 2004 address. It was based on the understanding that economic and social progress could not be made without being attuned to the content and the spirit of democracy.
The huge shine of the Mandela presidency is endangered now. As a country, we are regressing in many ways from those halcyon days. The need to protect all the gains of our constitutional democracy and the human rights that go with them must therefore be made into a high priority for all of us. From ancient texts, we learn that a Tang dynasty arose in ancient China, which was characterized by such astute statecraft that it stands out in the annals of history. The civil service examination of the Tang dynasty 3,800 years ago was so refined that its basic form was used up to the 20th century. In later years, however, Sun Tzu succeeded to the throne. Unfortunately, he was so besotted with a woman that he neglected his duties. In a short while, the woman's friends and family's members were appointed to the government. Government then became a family thing. One of the woman's brothers quarreled with the General Li Shen, and this led to a war and the rapid collapse of the state. Leaders of government must serve as role models so that the legacy of Nelson Mandela, which is now under threat, lives on in the lives of every one of us. Let us day by day keep the gloss on those values so cherished by Nelson Mandela. Thus, through our actions, we too will inspire change amongst ourselves, our fellow citizens, and everyone else in the world.
There must have been those within our society who pondered that we have made an error of political judgment in allowing Mr. Mandela to serve only one 5-year term as the first president of a liberated South Africa, primarily because he introduced a unique but fundamental idea of reconciliation and nation building. Even to this day, this remains a categorical imperative for peaceful coexistence of different races and the peoples of South Africa. Unfortunately, honourable members, the successive presidents did not find this idea to be a priority to be pursued with the necessary vigor it required. There must also have been those who would argue that the demons of colonialism and apartheid were so deeply entrenched in the South African psyche that even more than one term of a Mandela administration would not have made absolute exorcism of this legacy of demons. Presently, the South African society is faced with menacing social, political, and economic challenges, threatening to derail peace and stability. Of note is the formidable resurgence of racial animosities and discrimination, hiding behind the cloak of one form of expression or another.
Honourable House Chairperson, your time has expired.
And that also brings us to the end of today's program. Join us again tomorrow for another live broadcast from Parliament. Until then, goodbye.